And at the completion of that initial public offering for SpaceX, private investors paid almost $2 trillion to own SpaceX. So what is SpaceX? Well, SpaceX has multiple divisions, but the most known division is Elon's satellite telecommunications wing called Starlink, where it's a global internet and satellite communication system. And it's pretty profitable in of itself, but much of the expense of the company is focused on rocket technology, space flight. And this is where the rest of the story of SpaceX comes in. So investors paid $1.77 trillion for SpaceX, where in 2025, the most recent complete year, SpaceX had total revenues of $18.7 billion on $4.9 billion in losses. So let's contemplate that. Investors paid $1.77 trillion to buy a company that actually lost almost $5 billion. Okay, so that's a multiple. In investment parlance, that's a multiple of 95 times 2025 annual revenues. So what were these investors buying? Well, SpaceX has a specific mission statement, and so I'll read it verbatim. Their mission says, to revolutionize space technology with the ultimate goal of enabling people to live on other planets. When you look around your life and you look around the U.S. economy and you look around at the global geopolitical and global economy situation, can you imagine anything that we need to be spending $1.77 trillion on more than a company that's not profitable, whose goal is to help people travel to other planets? So this leads us to breadcrumb number one. When too much money consolidates in too few hands, the purchase price of what they buy that completely detaches from the value they receive. I mean, by any measure of investment value, the idea that they are paying 95 times revenues on a fiscal year that actually showed losses makes no sense. But we'll get into what they're actually buying. But the point of the breadcrumb number one is, when you have so much money, it doesn't need to make sense. You have the privilege of just buying anything. And this is what they did this past week. So, how much is $1.77 trillion? We all get lost in the white noise of these big numbers. And I hear you, I feel the same thing too. But we need to have some understanding of what $0.77 trillion is and what investors had enough money to throw that much at SpaceX. So in episode 32, I talked about how scarcity was obsolete. And in making my case, I created something called the abundance threshold for U.S. households. And I based it on the cost at current market prices of the essential resources that an American household would need to live without financial precarity. I mean, life always has other problems, but money doesn't have to be one. Resource does not have to be one. So how much would that be? Deploying Claude AI, Opus 4.8, the analysis showed at current prices that for a family of four, that threshold is $110,000 a year. I cross-referenced it with the latest research on how much money do we need to be happy. The latest research showed that at around $110,000 a year for that family of four, we peak in our happiness. And money beyond that either plateaus or actually reduces our happiness. And there's lots of reasons for that. But the idea is peak happiness is reached at $110,000. So that those two analyses helped me to establish the American abundance threshold, $110,000. Then in that podcast, go back and check it out, episode 32. I then proceeded to stack up American households by the lowest 20% of earners, the next higher 20%, the middle 20%, the next higher 20%, and the highest 20%. And then I broke down the highest 20% by the highest 10% and the highest 1% also. Okay. So you had 7 categories of income earners of American households of our 332 million Americans. I said, okay, for the bottom 20%, or for each one of those categories, how much resource do they actually have? How much between the income and the assets that they own, how much do they have across the categories level? And it produced a gap. And it's a predictable gap that the bottom 20% had the biggest gap between the abundance threshold. And the next 20% had a little bit smaller gap. And the middle 20% had a $10,000 gap, but it was still a gap. And then it was only until you got into the top 40%, those two categories, and broken down even further within the top 20%, did you have resource abundance? People who had way more resource than the abundance threshold. And so, to give you some idea of how big $1.77 trillion, which is what investors threw at SpaceX in one day to buy that company, that $1.77 trillion would cover the resource shortfall to the abundance threshold for 93 million Americans. Yes, it would cover the gap for the entire middle 20%. And it would cover the gap for another 26.2 million households in that second lower 20%. So for a total of 93 million Americans, it would take them out of resource precarity for a year. That's just what investors threw at SpaceX in one day. Then in episode 23, I introduced something called the price gap agreement, because we have a housing affordability crisis going on in America. And so what the price gap agreement does is it empowers wealthy impact investors who participate in the sustainable debt market. And this is a place where wealthy investors agree to take a lower return on investment than the market would normally pay them in order to achieve a sustainable goal, renewable energy, lower greenhouse gas emissions, or whatever, climate tech, or a social goal, wealth and income inequality, bridging inequality. Okay, so for those impact investors who are willing to accept a lower return on investment to achieve either of those goals, I created the price gap agreement because right now, the median middle class household is priced out of buying a home. And so right when we need to convert American housing to renewable energy, which is going to take some money, we now can't afford to buy homes. The middle class is priced out. And the impact of the middle class being priced out of buying homes is that their middle class income is driving rents up at a rate that lower income families are having to choose to eat less in order to pay their rent. So now we have food insecurity as a major problem in the United States. So the price cap agreement says this: the impact investor will provide the gap between what a middle class household could afford in their mortgage and the cost of the house. We will also tag on to the cost of the house upgraded utilities and solar panels on the house to make the home fully green certified. So that gap between the cost of the house and to provide to make it green certified will be covered by the investor. Then, in order to participate in the program, we're going to charge 3 points. one paid by the buyer, the middle class household, one paid by the seller because they're getting their house at full price, and one shared by the two real estate agents who are getting a real estate transaction that would not exist because the middle class household can't afford to buy this house without this program. So those 3 points that come from participating in buying this green certified house goes to subsidize the rent on the rental property that the middle class household is vacating. So just think of the quality household that a middle class family would have. Yeah, we're going to make that rental property affordable to a lower income family by subsidizing the rent for 3 years minimum with the 3 points from the purchase of the house. So this is the price gap agreement. It has wealthy investors helping middle class households afford to buy a green certified house. And then the middle class household with their participation fees helps a lower income household get a quality rental property for 3 years that they can afford. This idea, the price gap agreement, can scale nationally. Yes, we need to go to a proof of concept phase to demonstrate the program would work. But once we do that, it can scale nationally. And we do have national programs. There's something called the SBA 504 program. It's a Small Business Administration government guaranteed program for small businesses who do not have the financial strength to get financing with commercial banks in the private sector. The 504 program offers them low fixed rate mortgages to purchase their commercial real estate that houses their businesses. That is a version of a national program where real estate is being purchased by businesses. We can do the same thing for residential homeowners. And so I innovated and modeled out a way to do it with the Federal Reserve. And they could do it nationally through the Federal Reserve, scaling a national program over a 10-year period where the Federal Reserve would provide 95% loan-to-value financing in the current interest rate environment at 4.85% fixed for 30 years. Yes, the Federal Reserve can do that. The capital needed for that program to do 5 million houses, the $1.77 trillion that investors just threw at SpaceX, would cover 10 years of the capital. And let me be clear, that is not the cost. That is the capital expended, but there's returns in the capital. The cost of the price gap agreement with the Federal Reserve program is only $1.5 billion a year. But the idea is this $1.77 trillion that investors just threw at Elon Musk and SpaceX for a company that's not making money would transform the residential housing affordability crisis, would cover the capital for the Federal Reserve to provide financing, 95% loan-to-value financing for 5 million homes, all green certified. Yeah, that's how significant this $1.77 trillion is. And so you have to ask yourself, how did we get to a place where so much money is in so few hands that they are free to speculate on the most bizarre things? Like, okay, living on another planet. You would think this is Star Trek, but at $1.77 trillion, these people are serious. You've reached the end of episode 39, the YouTube cut. If you've enjoyed this excerpt, click the link below. Join the Breadcrumbs community as a monthly membership on Patreon. The cost is only $10 a month. And for your membership, you will get $20 worth of free gifts, plus you'll get access to the full video version of all the Breadcrumbs episodes. Plus you get email access to me to deepen the conversation each week. And you will also get access to all the important research that I use to make these episodes. So I hope you enjoyed this YouTube cut. Click the link below, join the community, and I'll see you next time in the conversation.